The Catholic Church was always right. When I was anti-Catholic, I thought they were wrong. Now that I've studied it, this is why you who have been raised Catholic, even Orthodox, it is a shame you don't know the richness of your tradition. But those of you who know, I can tell you after 20 years, it took me 20 years to come and say the Catholic Church was right.
So when Paul says to him that worketh not, that worketh, is that works that he is implying circumcision, since you mentioned
Yes.
Okay,
All
right.
Romans 4. He's talking about the works of the law. He began that discussion in Romans 2. If you go to Romans 2 and you start reading from 12 onwards, he's going to be talking about the works of the law meaning the Mosaic law, that the Jews were saying you must still keep in order to remain righteous in the sight of God and be rewarded with immortality. And Paul says, no, we keep the law, but it's not the law of Moses. It's the law of Christ. I'll get there. Now, let me use Legacy Standard Bible because that's a Calvinist translation. What then shall we say that Abraham, our forefather, according to flesh, has found? Is that how he ended up being declared the friend of God and being justified? For Abraham was justified by works. See, this is the confusion. Right here, right? Works. Okay, now this is where people who don't read context are going to think, oh, he's talking about any and every and all kinds of works. The works that Paul is talking about, it's the works of the law. How do I know? It's not talking about any works. He's saying to the Jews, because who are his interlocutors? Who is he trying to expose and refute? The Judaizers. If you're saying you're justified by works, what works? The works of the Mosaic law. How do I know? Let's keep reading. Here. Therefore, is this blessing on the circumcised? Oh, there is that group, the Judaizers. Or on the circumcised also, meaning, is this blessing only for the Jews? Or the Gentiles are not circumcised? For we say faith was counted Abraham as righteousness. How then was it counted? While he was circumcised or uncircumcised? Not while circumcised, but while uncircumcised. And he received the sign of circumcision, a seal of the righteousness of the faith which he had while uncircumcised, so that he might be the father of all who believe without being circumcised, that righteousness might be counted to them. Now I'm explaining what he's saying here. He's saying when Abraham trusted God and believed God and obeyed God, and God said Abraham is righteous because of his faith in me. Did God say that before Abraham was circumcised or after?
Abraham wasn't circumcised.
That's his point. So what is he telling the Jews? If you're saying this righteousness that you have comes by faith, and I'm going to demonstrate that by faith he means faithfulness. Let me go full screen, because that's how he begins in Romans 1:17, quoting Habakkuk 2:4 to show you what he means by faith. Here, he's saying, if you're saying that this righteousness that we have, it's not just a declaration, but a righteous standing that we have, comes from the works of the law, then how in the world did God make Abraham and declare Abraham righteous when Abraham did not have the works of the law? There was no law of Moses. You see his point?
Mm-hmm.
He's using Abraham to prove that your righteous standing, your righteousness, this righteous standing that God gives you, where he makes you righteous, and you're supposed to then maintain that righteousness, doesn't come from the works of the law. It comes by faith in whatever God tells you to do. That's why he mentions that when God told Abraham to get circumcised, he got circumcised. And if you still don't see that the works that he's talking about, that Abraham was not justified by works, is the works of the law, right here. For the promise to Abraham or to his seed that he'd be heir of the world was not through the law. It's not the law that will make you righteous. It's your faithfulness that will make you righteous. So whatever God tells you to do, when you're faithful to do it, that's what will make you righteous. Does everyone get the point? Now, how does that relate to you? In a nutshell, he's saying Abraham was made righteous, declared righteous, and maintained his righteousness by his faithfulness to whatever God told him. But that's before the law of Moses. When the law of Moses came, Israelites were made righteous, declared righteous, and maintain their righteousness by being faithful to do whatever God commanded in the law of Moses. Now that Christ has come, we are now made righteous, declared righteous, and maintain our righteousness by being faithful to obey the law of Christ. That's the point. It's about faithfulness from beginning to end. The question is, what does that faithfulness look like? What does it entail? Well, at the time of Abraham, there was the law of Moses, but they were still faithful to do whatever God told them to do. During time of Moses, only way you could be faithful is to obey the law of Moses. Now that Christ has come, your faithfulness is shown by obedience to Christ. But ever understand what his point is? The works that he's talking about, the context of Romans 1, 2, and 3, and 4 are the works of the law. So Abraham was not justified by works, meaning works of the law. How do we know? Because he goes on to talk about the law. The entire context is the law of Moses that the Judaizers were insisting that people had to keep. And he says, no, what you must do is be faithful to God, and that faithfulness is obeying whatever God requires of you at that time. At the time of Abraham, Abraham's faithfulness did not come from the law of Moses. There was no law of Moses. But notice that even in this chapter, it's showing you what Abraham is doing, right? What did he do? Well, he got circumcised. And before Genesis 15:6, which is what Paul quotes, what did Abraham do to prove his faith, that he was faithful? He left Haran when God told him, and he settled in Canaan. So the entire story of Abraham is Abraham being faithful to take God at his word and do what God tells him to do. The Catholic Church was always right. When I was anti-Catholic, I thought they were wrong. Now that I've studied it, this is why you who have been raised Catholic, even Orthodox, it is a shame you don't know the richness of your tradition. But those of you who know, I can tell you after 20 years, it took me 20 years to come and say the Catholic Church was right. The works that Paul is talking about, it's the works of the law. How do I know? If you want to do justice to Paul, and you understand what he's addressing in Romans 4, the discussion for Paul begins in Romans 1:16. Romans 1:16, and you continue reading until you arrive when now he brings up a different theme, a different point, even though it's all interconnected and interrelated. So Paul is beginning by presenting his gospel to the Romans. Why? Just in case the Judaizers have crept in and corrupted them. Who are the Judaizers? The Judaizers are those Jews who were telling Gentiles, you believe in Jesus? Now you need to be faithful to the law of Moses. It is faithfulness to the law of Moses that will ensure that God will reward you with immortality. This is the debate. Okay? Paul is saying, no. God justifies the ungodly because of what Jesus did, and you putting your trust in Jesus and obeying Jesus. They said, no, God justifies the ungodly, what Jesus did for them on the cross, and when you trust in Jesus, you're then required to keep the law of Moses. What Paul calls the work of the law. You understand what the context is, right?
I'm starting to understand, Sam.